Members, that takes us to motions on notice. Number 15, industrial hemp. The Honourable Dr Brian Walker.
Thank you, President. President, I move that this House recognises that industrial hemp has a huge potential to become a multi-billion-dollar industry here in WA. It's a crop with considerable environmental benefits for the state, with expanded trade and market opportunities in leaf and flower products, and cannabidiol. B, encourages the government to consider a review of the state's industrial hemp laws and regulations to better allow the industry to flourish, with such a review to include, but not be limited to, 1, the levels of THC permissible within the definition of industrial hemp, and the ability to exercise some level of discretion in regards to hot crops during our summer months, and 2, the possibility of longer licensing periods, up to 5 years, from the current 3, and C, calls upon the government to look favourably upon the expansion and diversification of the industry throughout the state.
Members, the Honourable Dr Brian Walker has moved that motion, and the question is the motion be agreed. The Honourable Dr Brian Walker.
Thank you, President. Now, members will be aware from yesterday's news in the West, the headlines, "Thanks a ton, China. Iron ore slump could end cost of living help in WA." And they're noticing that for every dollar loss in the iron ore price, WA misses out on 94 million in royalties. And the thought here of the price coming down to 80, maybe even $70, would shave billions of dollars off our economy, and the effect, the knock-on effect in our society would be actually quite severe. In fact, I think the Premier mentioned that the volatility would inevitably affect WA. But also said that we understand the ramifications of living in a mining-based economy. Well, we do. And I have mentioned this, and indeed I know the then Shadow Minister of Shadow Treasurer, the Honourable Steve Thomas, several times had mentioned the volatility of the iron ore prices and the effect it will have on our budget. And on a number of occasions, I have mentioned that hemp is a crop which would certainly be helpful at balancing that that balance of trade, because we need to find some measure of security in our state. And so what I'll be pointing out today is how we as a state can move to protecting ourselves. And I'm just sad that the members of the mainstream media have decided not to pay attention to this. Maybe they'll deign to grant some measure of recognition in the future. Good man. Because, you see, there's people like yourself who will definitely be benefiting from the advantages of a hemp-based economy. Now, hemp, you see, people might say, how long has hemp been around for? Well, how long has the world been around for? They're one of the oldest cultivated crops in human history. And it's got at least over the last 4,000 years, apart from in China making paper and ropes, and India, the Middle East as well, making ropes for sails and clothing. In fact, it used to be essential to have hemp here when the first fleet came. We needed to grow hemp so that we would have ropes and sails for our sailing boats. It goes on to say that in Europe, hemp became a critical crop. For making, again, ropes and sails and the items of daily use. The Islamic age was no different. The colonial period in America, it was a vital crop in the American colonies. A vital crop. Without hemp, they would not have been able to flourish as they did. Moving into the 19th century, it states a staple crop for pioneers in the US as they were expanding westwards. And, of course, the decline then came. You might wonder why the decline, but there's environmental, economic reasons for that, I'm sure. But we could talk about that at some length over a coffee. Now, the 20th century, the Marijuana Tax Act came into the States in 1937, and that heavily regulated the cultivation of hemp because it conflated hemp with marijuana. There's an important word, conflated hemp with marijuana. They lifted that ban, if you like, in World War II because, of course, it was essential for the war products there, and then later again it was again banned. And it's largely banned in many countries now due to the war on drugs. If you're going to conflate hemp with marijuana, yes, you're going to want to combine that with the failed war on drugs. But hemp is not a drug, so why was it therefore made so unpopular? Why? There must have been some reason for that. I can only assume there had to be some economic reason, because it certainly was not a medical reason, certainly was not a societal reason. Indeed, now, that in the 21st century, we're experiencing a revival of hemp, particularly for sustainable products, and the legalisation in the US under the 2018 Farm Bill. So today, it's used in a wide range of products. The people do say 20,000 different products. I was, in my clinic, I was particularly surprised to hear from a representative of a company making bomb and bulletproof motors for the covers for motors for the ADF. Imagine you're in a war zone, there's bombs and bullets flying around, and your motor is protected by a cover made of hemp and carbon fibre. Now, this is the type of economy which we could then develop to send into space, could we not? Is it worth our time to have a closer look at this? And this is really what the motion is all about. Because all those three ABC points, they actually, I'm going to talk about them all in one, because we're looking at a holistic approach to a crop. Now, what are the key considerations? If we were to grow hemp freely in Western Australia, what could be the annual value? What would be the use of it? And we can look at how... What are we actually talking about with hemp itself? We've got, in the first point is the hemp utilisation. We're looking at the non-THC cannabinoids. We're looking at the fibres. Did we know, for example, that the fibres used to make pet bedding, you can see these in the pet shops now, pet bedding is about $1.5 billion worth of industry. The hemp seeds are available as a food product, a supplement, and a very useful product, omega-3, 6 and 9 being available, and you would find those as a very sensible part of an anti-inflammatory diet, and that would be only for use for people who are looking to manage their wellness. And it can also be a hemp biomass. We're looking here, maybe we're having troubles now looking here sensibly at the hemp, the industry around alternative fuels, and in particular hydrogen. Could hemp be used for creating hydrogen as a fuel? Yes, it could. But there's more to it. As a cropping system, as a cropping rotational crop, it can enhance the soil, and farmers would benefit greatly from the use of that to aid the yield they're getting from their other crops. It can be used as a standalone crop, and we'll talk about that in some detail later. We can look at is it useful? Is it a profitable product? Well, we've got the CBD production. The yields, it says, can vary. These are my estimates, by the way, my research. I'm actually asking for the government to help me in actually getting real research done into a live product on our paddocks here. But we could get between 1,000 to 2,000 kilograms of CBD oil per hectare. Is it valuable? We'll come to that in a moment. The fibre production, 3 to 10 tonnes per hectare, depending, of course, on the variety. And again, I remember the Honourable Alana McTiernan was telling us about the different strains which are producing valuable crops in WA just now. And seed production, seed yields ranging from between 500 to 1,200 kilograms per hectare. How about market prices? Well, the oil itself, the price can fluctuate, as indeed can all products fluctuate. But the oil can range in price from per kilogram $2,000 to $10,000, depending on what we're actually getting, depending on purity and, of course, market conditions. The fibre itself, between $200 to $500 per tonne, and seed prices between $2 to $5 per kilogram. Now, if you look at that, how much do you get for the wheat per hectare? We're talking between $700 and $800. Perhaps the Honourable Darren West can correct me on that, but that seems to be a fairly standard price. Yes, per hectare. Per hectare yield of wheat in WA?
Yeah, 700 to 1,000. Yep.
Very good. As a matter of interest, Honourable Darren West, what's the yield like in the eastern states?
Be a little bit higher than us, depending where you are.
Yeah,
not
3
much.
to 8 bag yield. Yeah. Okay. Now, but the area of potential cultivation could significantly influence the total value. For example, I'm going to use the example here of 10,000 hectares dedicated to hemp. And looking specifically at what could we do with that. Now, estimating then the annual value. And this is where we ought to be very careful. How are we as a society going to use hemp? And basically what we're talking about, apart from the benefits of hemp itself, is what is the profit coming into the country? How can we balance that trade deficit we might have if the price of iron ore goes down? Now, assuming 10,000 hectares for CBD production, at the numbers I've given, we'd be looking at something like, per 10,000 hectares, $75 billion. $75 billion. Now, the fibre for 20,000 hectares would just be 42 million, and for seed production for, again, 20,000 hectares, just $60 million. And that really is, those are significant figures, are they not? Could we not use them? I wonder, for 10,000 hectares devoted to producing CBD oil at 75 billion, how many hospitals could we build with that? So that's just shy of $75.1 billion annually, and that is my forecast without having the facilities to investigate this, which is why I'm calling on the government to consider looking at this in some detail, because if my figures are correct, and I assume they are, but I would like you to check them, assuming my figures are correct, we have at our disposal the potential for quite significant gains in our society. There's not just the gains in money, of course, there's plenty more we could look at. So the question I have now is, of course, why don't we do that? If we've got such a potential in front of us right now, there has to be a good reason for not doing it already. What could that be? Well, there's a number of reasons here. We've got, first of all, the historical prohibition. Now, as I said earlier, hemp was conflated with marijuana, which a name I hardly ever want to use because it's quite pejorative. I prefer the term cannabis, but we'll use the word marijuana, which led to strict regulations and outright bans on its cultivation. Why? Well, they're conflating hemp with cannabis, which could, of course, be used for a number of reasons, including also as a substitute for alcohol for people wanting to relax. And why was it banned? I don't really know. Why was it called a narcotic? Well, it absolutely should not be. So we have actually a lie at international level, which is then having a knock-on effect at the nations and states, which are preventing us from accessing a valuable growing herb because we're frightened of a lie. And this really ought to be addressed. Do we want to falsely conflate the two, which is currently what we are doing? We can look at the licensing and compliance, and here we have a wonderful example in our state of how red tape and bureaucracy is making it simply difficult to get access to growing hemp. And part of the reason is, we want to be careful that there's not too much THC. Why? At the moment, we have got a fairly liberal 1% definition of THC, below which it's industrial hemp, and above that it's called something else. And you wonder, okay, so 1.5% THC, are we really going to want to raid that plant to smoke it? I remember very well, I remember here talking about, in replying, when I spoke about a hempcrete house, a house made with hempcrete, which is actually fireproof and carbon-saving and environmentally safe and friendly. And the words I got back was, but can you smoke the house? Which reflects basically a complete misunderstanding of what's going on here. And so this type of thinking is really one of the reasons why we are stuck in the past of saying, no, hemp, we have to regulate that and regulate it heavily. So would 1.5% mean that people go into to grab that to smoke a low THC herb? Well, look, under 10%, no one's going to want to be interested. What I'm prescribing now is looking at something like 20%, up to 32%. So 10%, 2%, where's the problem? Are we actually stopping a major cash inflow into our economy because we're frightened of a non-existing problem? Another reason for concern is the fluctuating prices and market volatility, which, of course, could have an effect on the marketable value. But also, and this is important for us just now, because we're making it difficult to actually grow hemp, we've actually got a problem with the lack of established markets, because if you haven't got the product going, then there's no offtake. No one's going to want to get a product which is difficult to access. So it's a kind of a circular reasoning here. If there's no one's going to take it, no one's going to grow it. If no one's growing it, no one can take it. We have a problem. And this should be, I think, addressed with sensible regulation. And the last one is, of course, maybe we should, if we allow this to happen, we're going to oversupply. If we rapidly increase the growth of any product, we might have oversupply, prices crashing, people going bankrupt, and that would be an issue. Then again, how many people know how to grow hemp? It's called a weed in other places, but Is it easy to grow? Well, it needs to be grown properly. There's pest and disease management, and DPIRD here would be very well interested in seeing how safe this is, especially if you consider the polyphagous shot hole borer and the effect it's having on trees. Could we not then look at replacing our current wood supply with hemp? That's a possibility. Would it save us money? It's certainly a possibility. Should we consider it? Yes, we should. But it should also be examined by competent authorities who are not afraid to have an open mind and an opinion which is open to all possibilities, including proving me wrong. The crop rotation concerns, it's beneficial as a crop, but it does require planning. I do not know of any single farmer who is going to plant crops or manage animals without planning. So, of course, planning is part of that. Another major problem we've got at this moment, and we have this currently in the southwest of WA, is a lack of processing facilities. The fibre that needs to be processed, the hemp seeds, the CBD oil itself, all of these require specialised facilities. And if we haven't got the offtake, who's going to invest in the infrastructure required to produce the product? And with that, of course, comes a high initial investment. This all requires capital, and this is one place where the government could very well be of importance in helping this to take off, to flourish. There's economic and financial barriers, of course, there's access to capital. If it's perceived that we're growing a dangerous crop that could be used for drug seekers, then, of course, the banks will be unwilling to loan. We need to have a strong think about how we protect those who wish to grow hemp. And again, that's an area where government could very well be of great importance. And the high initial costs, of course, anyone who's trying to start a new business will know how expensive it can be and how deadly it is to your bank account. Got another area, of course, is the association with marijuana, with cannabis. We know the differences are there. We can see them quite clearly, but the stigma is there because 90 years of propaganda makes it difficult to speak the truth with an open mind. We've also got research and development gaps. I mean, I mentioned here that wonderful shield, that protective motor cover, which protects ADF vehicles from bombs and bullets. We haven't had the time or the opportunity to actually really investigate the potential because it's been so difficult to actually produce the crop in the first place. And then, of course, the international issues. It's all very well if Western Australia grows a brain and decides that hemp is safe, and if Australia then follows suit, what about the countries we wish to export to? So we're going to have issues, I think, in the not too distant future, trying to find good relations with people who are prepared to accept a healthy, healing solution to what could be quite major problems. And another area which we ought to look at, I'm missing out a few due to lack of time, is the lack of government support and incentives. Because, unlike other major crops, hemp has traditionally received little in the way of government subsidies or support. Although I must confess, the support that companies known to me here have received good help from the government, and for that I do thank the government, the Cook government. So, okay, so that being the case, where are we going to go with this? The challenges of industrial hemp cultivation, one of the challenges is including the hot crops. Now, but by hot crop, I mean under certain temperature conditions, the percentage of the cannabinoids, including THC, can vary. And with that, the level of THC can rise above the current mandated level of 1% maximum. So what can we do about that? How can we protect farmers from having suddenly been accused of raising a drug crop rather than a hemp crop? So we need to have a scientific review and a risk assessment. Again, this is what the government would be advised to do. Let's look at this very closely. Is that limit of 1% really sensible? And I have to acknowledge, Australia has raised that limit from 0.3% to 1%. Like Switzerland has as well. And I do think that's a good step in the right direction. But as I said, under 10%, no one is going to be interested in this as anything other than industrial hemp. So would 2% kill you, 2.5%, would that kill you? So shall we look at that and see what the actual risks are? I calculated a little while earlier, if we feed hemp to animals, say cows, as a very good feedstock, if we did that, would there be tetrahydrocannabinol in the meat? Yes, there would, a small amount. How much would I need to take to get one particular high? About 300 kilograms just now. So a couple of cows to eat to get one high. I can think of a lot better ways of getting high if anyone thinks that's a good idea, and I personally do not. But if you did, I certainly wouldn't be buying 300 kilograms of meat to achieve it. So we could maybe relax the THC limits. That would, of course, be a very sensible thing to do. The 1.5%, 2%, maybe we should get some flexibility. That is an area where the government could certainly do some work. We could develop like a tiered licensing system. Maybe if we look at between 1 and 2%, we could have one level of licensing, above that more, below that less. These are things, again, which the government departments would be very capable of assessing what is the risk to the population, the risk to our economy, and the risk to the farmer. We might have conditional tolerance for hot crops. Conditional tolerance, we might legislate for that. We could have a mitigation strategies for farmers with guidelines and support to mitigate the risks of hot crops. We could enhance our testing and monitoring capabilities. I know of one case earlier this year where the farmer had actually called in November of last year saying, these crops are going to be hot, come and test. So nothing happened until April, when the people came along and said, oh, you got a hot crop, and then began to do him, having the police searching the place and arresting and confiscating, because he was now guilty of having grown a drug crop, although the percentage was actually very, very low. Just it was above 1%, as indeed predicted. And being treated as a drug dealer when all you're trying to do is grow a healthy crop is really quite testing. We could do remote sensing and AI monitoring. We can do that. And we could even collect data. The Internet of Technology could actually regulate these things and look at them and give us proper information in a timely manner. We could educate. We could educate both the farmers and the politicians and the people about this, and we could certainly help with research. And this is again an area where we could get good results from government.
Members, before I give the call to the Minister, I'd like to welcome to the Legislative Council the Rostrata Primary School. You're very welcome. I hope you enjoy your visit with us. Members, the question is the motion be agreed. The Minister for Agriculture.
Thank you, President. And I want to thank the Honourable Dr Brian Walker for this motion. We support the motion, and we categorically support the diversification of the West Australian economy through agriculture. And we have invested significantly to look at the I guess the potential of the industrial hemp, and also researching how well it can work in WA conditions. DPIRD does a lot of research across a lot of sectors. For the benefit of members, I will just point out there are basically sort of two industries in Western Australia that I guess broadly fall under the cannabis or hemp link. So we have medicinal cannabis, and we have a I've definitely toured one very high-tech, state-of-the-art facility down in my electorate that produces high-grade medicinal cannabis for the export market. That's grown in a hothouse-type conditions with drip irrigation, very efficient use of water, very efficient use of nutrients. It is a hydroponic setup. Now, I'm sure people in this room might be familiar with hydroponic setups for cannabis. This one is a legal one, producing an export-grade product. I understand there are plans in place, or they may well have started construction on some other medicinal cannabis facilities. Now, that is different to industrial hemp. Industrial hemp is essentially a broad-acre crop, and as the Honourable Dr Walker has been telling us for more than 3.5 years, it has lots of uses and is indeed a magnificent plant that has lots of uses. There are some challenges in Western Australia, but that's not to say they can't be overcome. I'm reliably informed that the old Department of Ag first started research into industrial hemp in 1996. So it has been on the agenda for a little while, and since this government came in, since 2018-19, we have been investing money into R&D and research, and giving out grants to the private sector. So I'm reliably informed that DPIRD has over the years planted more than 1,000 hectares, primarily to identify seed suitable for Western Australian conditions. And that's important because research to date in Western Australia over the last 4 years has demonstrated that to grow industrial hemp in Western Australia it needs to be irrigated. And irrigation provides some challenges and some additional costs, because obviously with irrigation not only do you need access to water, but there's also electricity to pump water, and some crops, once you add in those extra costs of pumping water and putting in irrigation infrastructure, may not add up financially. It's important to remember that, you likened it to the grain industry. Western Australia has some of the most efficient dry land farmers in the world, and we have a broadacre system that's grown on unirrigated land, so rain-fed crops, which then presents challenges. So it's probably not as easy as a broadacre farmer then switching from a crop that isn't irrigated to an irrigated crop. So that means in Western Australia, the scientists at DPIRD tell me that the crops quite frequently do not reach maturity if they're unirrigated. That's not to say that we can't find a variety that suits our conditions. What's happened, though, is because of these challenges, some growers have been prioritising food production over hemp production. I'm advised that as of last year, there were only 24 hectares of commercial hemp crops grown, which was down from 200 hectares in 2009. We are, however, investing into R&D, as I said, to make this viable. We know that the more uses that we have for a crop, the more attractive it will be to farmers wanting to plant this crop. So some of the examples I've got is since 2018-19, DPIRD have allocated around $2.6 million just in staffing costs to actually support the sector. There's been a number of research projects, including partnerships. So we started in, there's been some national hemp trials. One of the ones that's particularly interesting is the Opening the Gate, Phase 1 and Phase 2. It started as a partnership between DPIRD and AgriFutures, the national body. After the first phase, Charles Sturt University also joined in the WA Chem Centre, and this was looking at the nutritional value of hemp as a forage crop for livestock, particularly for sheep, and it was actually to provide data on the nutritional value of hemp forage. And to also look at ensuring that there was no THC residue in the sheep meat, because that was something that was, I guess, presenting a concern. And the idea of that, I guess, was, as I said, to provide more uses for a crop. We've also invested $20,000 in a small hemp as silage project, again looking at stock feed, and that was operated in Kununurra and Manjimup. And again, looking at those different farming systems from the tropics to the south, but looking at those high rainfall areas. I'm also pleased to say DPIRD has been actively, there's been about $900,000 in funding looking at the National Industrial Hemp Variety Trials, which operated from 2021 through to this year, and that's actually to demonstrate the best varieties to use. So I talked about the fact that we often do research as into what kind of products grow well in Western Australia, and whether that's developing new breeds of apples or developing new breeds of wheat that grow better in Western Australia. We've done the same for industrial hemp. And those trials have taken place, as I said, in Kununurra and Manjimup. There's also been work done on the time of sowing, so to provide data on the available hemp seed, mixed seed varieties, new Australian lines, and to actually provide advice to growers on the best time to sow those seeds. So we are certainly working with the industry. Ultimately, at the end of the day, this is a commercial crop that individual farmers will make a decision on. Now, I do know, however, that it is a commercial crop that requires a level of licensing that other crops do not, and that may well put people off planting this crop because of the fact that it has these additional requirements. I will just make a point that there are both state and federal regulatory regimes. So obviously this motion deals with the WA's Industrial Hemp Act. There is also a federal narcotics drug act. There's also, when we're talking about it as food, that's covered by FSANZ, the Food Standards of Australia and New Zealand. Again, Commonwealth. There's the Therapeutic Goods Act, which comes into play, and the Honourable Dr Brian Walker and I sort of got tangled up in all of this when we both served on the Select Committee into cannabis and hemp. It is indeed a confusing space with legislation. What is important to remember, though, is that the state's Industrial Hemp Act is essentially there to provide growers a defence against charges of the WA Misuse of Drugs Act. So that is why we have these THC levels, 1%, and as the honourable member pointed out, that percentage was raised from 0.35%. And I do acknowledge that he talked of hot crops. I do acknowledge that this is a plant that grows, and sometimes during different weather conditions, the THC level can be difficult to predict. I am pleased to say that DPERD, who I guess have remit of the Industrial Hemp Act, certainly took on board some of the feedback that was provided during that select committee into cannabis and hemp, and they have done an internal review of the Act and how they administer it. As a result of the recommendations from the select committee and the administrative review, I'm happy to say DPERD improved the licence application form and consolidated it with a renewal form. We did, certainly I remember being on that committee, we did find the whole process a little bit confusing. So they made improvements, were made in the information licence applicants had to provide as part of a new application. They provided clearer information and clearer frequently asked questions on the department's website because that was a little confusing. They formed a cross-departmental working group was established to maintain awareness of the issues and developments which may impact the industrial hemp industry. And they made sure that all licensing processes were grounded against the requirements of the legislation. They looked at the timing of payment processing and responses to inquiries and made sure that was improved. And importantly, a dedicated officer was allocated to focus primarily on hemp licensing conditions. And they've also made sure that those licence conditions were reviewed and standardised, and that the working group is progressing towards a summary of their policy and approved set of resources. So we, DPERD, were certainly aware of some of the challenges, and as I said, that's why we've invested, since 2018, almost $2.7 million in staff and FTE on costs to actually make sure that we are working towards supporting the industry. Now, we talked about private investment. The Honourable Dr Brian Walker talked about processing, and it is indeed a challenge. And again, I don't think anyone is suggesting that the government should be building processing plants, or indeed the government should be telling farmers what they should or shouldn't be farming. But we certainly are supportive of the industry, and we have a number of grants, and we give out a number of grants for value adding and processing across a wide range of sectors, whether it's whether it's abattoirs, whether it's small food producers, whether it's breweries, whether it's wineries. There's a whole range of industries where we can see the benefit of value adding. I can think of a few off the top of my head. Cold pressed canola oil is one that's fantastic. There's a lot of value add investment grants that have gone out, and equally we have certainly looked at that with regard to how we can support the sector. So we obviously have our regional economic development grants, which are open to all comers, not just agriculture, and then we had some value add grants. I thought I might just talk about some of the grants that have been given out. So as early as November 2018, we gave someone in Kununurra, the MG Corporation, who I believe is the traditional owners up there. Yeah, they received a grant to develop a commercial vision for the East Kimberley industrial hemp and to develop a 5-year commercial plan for the product. There was also down in the southwest another hemp farm that received a grant for value adding of hemp food production. And this is Vast Valley Hemp, who I know have done a lot of work, and I see them around the traps at a lot of the food shows promoting their hemp food products. And that allowed them, so back in 2020, to purchase industrial scale seed storage equipment for the cleaning and roasting of their seeds and to expand their processing sector. There's been Hemp Squared, which I think is down in Bridgetown from memory. Hemp Squared, there was a $100,000 RED grant given to them in March 2022, and that was a building product. So we actually supported them to expand their processing facility from memory, it's a building block, I think it might be. I'm looking at you, you're nodding, so I'm thinking that's yes. And as we know, there's wonderful properties of hemp building products, so we certainly have provided funding to them. There's also the Industrial Hemp Grant Scheme that operated from 2019, and there was some work done on the industry food standards. There was a crop trial done down at Many Peaks. There was a hemp processing plant, some market development work done on that. There was a number of people that had received grants on that. In 2019, there was funding for a hemp processing plant down in Margaret River, and I think Dr Brian Walker and I may have toured that as part of the committee, and I think that may be where they're making the pet bedding that you were talking about. So if you're buying pet bedding for your guinea pig or your rabbit, it may well be made of hemp. There's been money given to the Collie Futures Small Grant Scheme for hemp grow to conduct a feasibility study. There's been other vouchers given to, again, Vass Valley to help them with their marketing and their tech support. So there has been money invested, so $1.1 million of grants on top of the money that we're committing to research trials, on top of the money allocated to FTE. Now, in the grand scheme of things, you may say that doesn't line up with the money we give to other industries. This is an emerging industry, though, and we work closely with AgriFutures, who are, of course, the federal levy-paying organisation that manages research. Whenever we do research in WA, we always try to partner with the relevant federal R&D body. So, for example, with grains research, we partner with the GRDC, the Grains Research and Development Corporation. Similarly, AgriFutures fills that role for hemp. So, look, we are supportive. We recognise your motion. We know that the regulatory situation is onerous, predominantly on a Commonwealth level, but we certainly want to work with the industry, and I'm certainly open to looking at a future review of the Act and to see what we can do, and I guess some continued advocacy with regard to the Therapeutic Goods Administration and those Commonwealth bodies with regards to how we can support this industry. At the end of the day, however, I will point out that we don't tell farmers what to farm. We don't tell processors what to build. We support and encourage, and I think farmers quite like making money, and so I'm sure if there was a way that they could grow this crop without too much of a regulatory burden, and the way they could get it processed locally and harvested locally, then I'm sure they would be very keen to do so. So with that, I just, as again, thank the Honourable Brian Walker for bringing this motion to the House. As Agriculture Minister, I do commit that we will look at the Act, noting that I'm Agriculture Minister for a few more months, and then we'll see what happens. Hopefully I'm still Agriculture Minister next term, but we'll actually, we have the small matter of an election in between then, but hopefully Dr Brian Walker and I are both back here, and we can continue this discussion then. Thank you.
Members, the question is the motion be agreed. The Honourable Brad Pettit.
Thank you, President. I just want to make some quick remarks in support of this motion before us. Look, I think this is actually a really important issue, and one that is, as the Honourable Brian Walker has pointed out, a really big opportunity for the state. I just want to focus on one element of this, which is around building, because there is a huge opportunity for us to address one of the big and one of the key sectors is actually responsible globally for about a third of carbon emissions, which is the construction sector. And understanding how materials, and especially materials like hemp, can be a big part of that solution is really, really important. And then the role that WA can play in that. Now, we heard the Minister talk. Actually, it was a bit depressing to hear there's only 24 hectares currently being grown of hemp. You would hope that this is being expanded, and certainly no one, I think, is arguing that we tell farmers what to grow, but I think our role here is to have the right regulatory regime, the right licensing regime that makes it easy and compelling for farmers to grow really important products that we need as we get serious about the transition to a low carbon economy to enable that to happen. Now, there's one way that I think that could be a really interesting way that we could encourage industrial hemp for building, which I saw when I was in Europe. I just wanted to share that with the Parliament here. So in Denmark, they've done something really interesting, which we're seeing playing out across a lot of key economies around the country, which is actually around setting targets and around actually the embodied energy that are in buildings. Now, the reason this is, of course, really relevant to hemp, because hemp actually has it has better than zero carbon. It's actually carbon negative because it actually absorbs more carbon than actually you require. It's the complete opposite to what we largely build with here in Western Australia, which is bricks and concrete, which is very, very carbon intensive. Now, what they've done in Denmark, just to give one example, is set up new rules around building. So as you design your building, you have to actually make sure that it meets the current target, and the current target is 12 kilograms of CO2 per cubic metre per year. Now, this is a target and a regulation that's going down each year. So that will go down to 8 kilograms next year, then to 6 kilograms, and so on. Now, of course, what that does is it makes products like hemp, like industrial hemp for buildings, and timber and other key products that are either zero carbon or actually negative carbon, very, very compelling in the sector. And what we can see then is actually, coming back to the point around, well, we don't have a market for these things, this actually creates the market for these really important products like industrial hemp that can help us transition. I mean, as I said, the Green Building Council has said that buildings are responsible for up to 39% of global energy-related carbon emissions. So 28% of those are from operations, and then the other 11% is from materials and construction. So I talked about materials and construction, how we can bring those down. But of course, the other great thing about hemp is that it's a really good insulator. It's a great, once it's there in the building, it actually helps our buildings to perform better. I've been looking at a couple of buildings that actually exist in Western Australia, which are built out of hemp, and they're great buildings. They perform well. They're really pleasant to live in. There are so many really clear benefits of these. But if we're going to realise these benefits, in fact, we can't just hope that that business embraces those. We've actually got to set up the right regulatory regimes, and we've got to set up the right kind of incentives in place to actually enable this transition to happen. So I think this motion before us today is a really important one, but it should be a motion that leads to substantive changes, not just in the agricultural sector and some of the things to do along that space, but actually hopefully a broader change around how we can actually use our regulatory regime, including the commerce space, and how we actually regulate our buildings to encourage really important changes in this space. So thank you, Dr. Walker, for bringing this to us, and I really hope that this does lead to some changes in this place. Thank you.
Members, the question is the motion be agreed. The Honourable Louise Kingston.
Thank you, President, and I rise to also support this motion. I live in Manjimup, which is where one of the trials of the hemp has been undertaken, and it is an absolutely fantastic crop that covers off on so many different uses. It was interesting, I was having a chat to Dr Walker, Honourable Dr Walker, just before his motion was put, and he was telling me it also is resistant to the polyphagous shot hole borer. So it could, as time goes on, be a valuable crop, because we do know that the polyphagous shot hole borer attacks avocados, which is one of our main crops in Manjimup, as are ornamentals, which of course that comes under all of our fruit trees as well. So that could be an interesting development. One of the other things, obviously, that I have mentioned here before that I'm very passionate about is baseload energy. And I think in terms of what the Honourable Member Dr Walker was saying also about misinformation, we can see that with the nuclear industry as well. But one of the benefits of the hemp industry is that it could be a biomass plant. From this website, it says hemp grown for the production of biomass fuels can provide all our gas, oil and coal energy needs and end dependency on fossil fuels. I found that really, really interesting. Some of the other information that was, as the Honourable Dr Pettit also mentioned, was about the carbon emissions, and there's significant benefits in terms of that and carbon farming for farmers, particularly in some of the marginal areas where crops are not grown as well. It also requires a lot less water or pesticides in cultivation compared to cotton, and also the use of fertiliser. Actually doesn't require any fertiliser either. So this motion is very important in terms of doing a review into this, because that will give much more security and information around the costs of growing this crop and the benefits. One of the other really interesting ones was the food benefits of it, and what it can do in lowering blood pressure and the, as the Dr. Walker, Honourable Dr. Walker mentioned, in terms of omega 3, 6 and 9. And 9's an interesting one because it doesn't come from a lot of our foods, so this could be a huge benefit in terms of that. So I just wanted to add those few extra comments and say that the hemp industry has some fantastic possibilities into the future, particularly in my area where I come from in Manjimup, because we grow a very large range of different things down there already. We have a research facility down there for DPIRD, which has been there for many, many years. So the functions of that could be expanded to be this hemp to be included in that as well. So thank you, Dr. Walker. I support your motion.
Members, the question is the motion be agreed. The Honourable Dr. Brian Walker in reply.
Thank you, President, and thank you, members who have spoken. And in particular, thank you to the Agriculture Minister. I think the Honourable Jackie Jarvis delighted me by detailing the extent to which the government is already engaged in managing the research into hemp as an industrial crop growth. There is only, and I'd also thank you to the contributions both from Honourable Dr. Brad Pettit and Honourable Louise Kingston, because it does reflect, I think, in our society the degree to which we see that changes have to be made, and also highlighting that we need new thinking. Thinking the old way is going to give us more of the old, and that is actually leaving us stuck in the past. And this hemp discussion is one area where we must get new thinking to get into a new part of life where we can actually move forward scientifically, safely, environmentally, into a realm where we are able to benefit better than we have in the past. Now, I started out my motion with a reference to yesterday's West Australian article about the falling price of iron ore. And I would like, bearing in mind the discussions we've had today, to highlight the fact that we are currently in a state of war. The war is against the cost of living, the declining cost of living, the declining affordability, I do beg your pardon, the increasing costs that we are facing, but also the risks to our economy caused by the geopolitical status in the world, particularly if we're dependent just upon iron ore for the balance of trade, that we are therefore at risk. We are a country whose borders, while they may be sovereign from the point of view of defending from the sea, our international relationships are going to require us to develop resilience to what's happening to the economy worldwide. And relying on more of the same, this old thinking of the iron ore or the minerals we dig from our land, is not enough. We must actually treat this like an act of war, a war against the people of Western Australia. And if we do not progress rapidly to regulating the hemp industry and taking away so much of that unnecessary red tape, the restrictions and the requirements which make it difficult, not impossible, but difficult for a hemp farmer to actually process the hemp growing in his paddock. Now, the simple example is that you can grow hemp, it's got a lot of uses there, but you can only use one part of that hemp depending on what kind of agreement you have with the government. So the rest gets ploughed into the earth. So you're losing vast amounts of potential income because we're required to abide by current restrictive licensing. And this actually is very, very hard. Farmers do not want to waste time, effort and money on chucking a good product into the ground for no good reason. There's other things they could do with that. There's less hassle they could have. There's hassle enough in farming rather than having to deal with the restrictions. that are currently in place. Now, the restrictions I pointed out are basically due just to one thing, which is the concern about THC. And those restrictions are basically also dependent upon untruths told at an international level by people who either did not know better or chose to tell untruths for their own personal or their national benefit. And one of those, of course, is the definition of cannabis as a narcotic and the international legislation, which then means that the hemp that we can produce now falls under the Single Drug Convention, which means that we need regulations to grow a healthy healing plant which can produce, as said, per 10,000 hectares, $75 billion, which is now no longer available to us because we are creating regulations which limit the ability to manage this plant. And so could I ask the government in the current process, take this more seriously, more urgently. We need action. We need to have a plant, a crop that is healthy and safe and used by many in many different areas. We need that plant to be freed. Free the plant, if you like. And so that we can then harvest the benefits of that and balance that very difficult balance of trade using iron ore and other minerals as the only solution for our international exports. We need to find something that is more helpful to us and helpful to our society, will help modify our climate change, will help improve our water management. There's so many things we can say that are good about this plant that keeping it in the dark ages of regulation is not helpful to us. So I thank the government for the support and I commend the plant to all.
Members, the question is the motion be agreed. All those of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary say no. The ayes have it. Members, that takes us to consideration of committee reports.